Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Transportation and Environment Subcommittee voting session on the budget. And we are starting today with our analysts, all four of whom are at the front desk, who will guide us through the decision document.
You have two documents in front of you, the white decision document and the dark or light pink additional page packet. We're going to go through the white package in page order and then refer to the additional pages as needed. So we can get started on page 1 of the white packet.
The Public Service Commission is on page 1 of the white packet. Recommendation 1 is a committee narrative requesting monthly data on residential utility terminations and arrearage. The agency concurred with the recommendation. There is an additional item related to supplemental budget on page 1 of the orange packet. Supplemental budget added 2 new positions to PSC. This recommendation deletes the new positions and associated funding. Moving on to the Office of People's Counsel on page 2 of the white packet, the recommendation was to concur with the governor's allowance. The agency concurred with our recommendation. I have an additional item. There is an additional item on page 2 of the orange packet. This recommendation deletes the new position and associated funding provided by the supplemental budget.
On page 3 is the Chesapeake Bay overview. It's a non-budgeted conglomeration of agencies. The agency response is to concur.
The Maryland Energy Administration is on page 4 of the white packet. Recommendation 1 reduces funds allocated for reclassification, which were double budgeted. The agency did not provide a response for this recommendation. Recommendation 2 on page 4 is a committee narrative requesting a report on revenue assumptions, fund balance, and uses of the Strategic Energy Investment Fund resources sourced from the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative. The agency concurred with the recommendation. Recommendation 3 on page 5 is a committee narrative requesting report on Federal Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act and Inflation Reduction Act funding for energy-related purposes. The agency concurred with the recommendation. There is a modification to this recommendation, which is included in the additional packet on page 5. This modification requests MEA to outline contingency plans in the event that federal funds become unavailable. Recommendation 4 on page 6 of the white packet is a committee narrative requesting report on MEA funding with submission of the fiscal 2027 budget. Recommendation 5 on page 7 of the white packet is a committee narrative requesting report on the uses of SEEF revenues transferred to the dedicated purpose account. The agency concurred with the recommendation. There are 2 more items in the additional packet for MEA. The first one is on page 3. It is a committee narrative requesting report on spending and fund balance of major fund sources for MEA.
On this one, I think we would like to hold it for now. That's page 3 of your salmon packet.
On page 6, There is a budget bill language. Supplemental budget provides $50 million for local government clean energy projects. This recommendation makes the appropriation contingent on legislation authorizing the expanded use of funds.
On page 8 of your white packet is the DLS recommendation for the Department of Planning. DLS recommends reducing funding for the Maryland Historic Revitalization Tax Credit Program's competitive commercial credits by $2 million. The agency disagrees, but recommends that if you do take the cut, you take it from the small commercial component.
And that is what we did, so thank the agency for that recommendation.
I'm sorry, you accepted their modification? Okay. There's also 2 additional recommendations in the salmon packet, I guess, on page 7. These are DLS recommendations regarding the supplemental budget. For the Department of Planning, DLS recommends deleting 2 new positions and associated funding in fiscal 25 and in fiscal 26.
On page 9 of the white document, for the Maryland Automobile Insurance Fund, there's a recommendation adopting the following narrative. Quarterly financial statements for the insured and uninsured divisions. The agency concurred with this recommendation, but there is a modified recommendation on page 8 of the salmon packet. This recommendation adds additional information regarding the assessment and potential rate increases.
Move to adopt the modified recommendation.
On page 10 for the Maryland Insurance Administration, there's a recommendation adopting the following narrative, insurance tracking system project status, and the agency concurs.
Move to adopt. Second.
On page 9 of the salmon packet is an additional recommendation for the Maryland Insurance Administration. This recommendation adopts a narrative regarding insurance fraud investigation status.
Move to adopt.
Page 11 of the white packet for the Canal Place Preservation Development Authority, the recommendation was to concur, and the agency concurred.
Move to adopt.
The Department of Information Technology begins on page 12. The first recommended action deletes general fund for the State Board of Elections new IT project to avoid having all major systems operated by SB at the same time. The agency disagrees.
Move to adopt.
Recommendation number 2 reduces general fund appropriation in ITIF for 3 IT projects to align fiscal 26 budgeted amount with cash flows available for these projects. The agency concurs. Recommendation number 3 is a narrative requesting report on classification of IT projects as expedited projects. However, there is an additional page, pages 10 and 11, that restricts funds pending submission of report on detailed accounting of ITIF balance, oversight, and criteria for expedited projects.
Move to adopt the modified.
On page 13, recommendation number 4 is a standard language that restricts funds for each agency that has 4 or more repeat audit findings pending adoption of corrective actions and a report from OLA on the status of repeat findings.
Move to adopt.
On the next page, 14, recommendation number 5 reduces special funds to delete 2 long-term vacant positions within the infrastructure program. The agency disagrees.
Move to adopt.
Recommendation number 6 deletes general funds in the radio program as a technical correction. The agency concurs.
Move to adopt.
Recommendation number 7 on page 15 reduces the fiscal 25 proposed deficiency appropriation for SB's NCRIS IT project to better align with the estimated requirement. The agency concurs.
Move to adopt.
Recommendation number 8 adds a back of the bill section reducing fund for the operating cost of the 700 megahertz radio system to better align with recent actual expenditures. The agency disagrees.
Move to reject.
There are additional pages, page number 12 of the Salmon packet. This is a narrative requesting report on potential use of blockchain for securely storing data and records.
Move to adopt.
Another additional item, which is a separate sheet. This is a contingent language restricting oversight funds for major IT projects to be transferred to another program within DO-IT for the Maryland Digital Service Operations.
Move to adopt.
Page 16 begins the Maryland Department of Transportation. Language on pages 16 and 17 is annual budget bill language requiring notification of changes to the capital program. The agency concurred.
On page 18 is the Secretary's Office. Item number 1 is a recommendation to delete one position, associated funding for a new position. The agency disagreed.
Move to adopt.
Item number 2 on that page is annual budget bill language restricting funding for the operating grants and aid. The agency concurred.
Move to adopt.
Turning to page 13 of the Salmon packet. This item is adding for supplemental budget number 1, language to $50 million that was transferred to the Department for solar energy projects to be contingent on legislation expanding the use of the C funds from which it came.
Move to adopt.
And then on page 14 of the Salmon packet, this is language, narrative expressing intent that the Maryland Transit Administration begin discussions with WMATA to provide some security services on the Purple Line when that becomes operational for the stations on which they overlap.
Move to adopt.
Going back to the decision document, page 19, this is the Secretary's PAYGO program. The first recommended action is annual budget bill language requiring notification of change to the capital program. The agency concurred.
Move to adopt.
On page 20 is the operating budget grant for WMATA. The recommendation was to concur with the governor. The agency concurred.
Move to adopt.
On page 21 is the WMATA capital budget grant. Again, the recommendation was to concur with the governor. The agency concurred.
Move to adopt.
Turning to page 22, this is the debt service requirement. First item is annual budget bill language establishing debt limits. The agency concurred.
Move to adopt.
Item number 2 is on page 23, annual budget bill language requiring reports on non-traditional debt. The agency concurred.
Move to adopt.
That takes us to page 25, which begins the State Highway Administration. The recommendation 1 is to delete 8 new positions and associated funding and indicate that the vacant positions should be reclassified instead. The agency disagreed.
Move to adopt.
Thank you. And on this note, I just want to say that there are a couple positions that may be eliminated basically because of the budget year, and it's throughout departments, and we regret having to do that, but in this budget year, we have to find savings where we could, and new positions were an easy target.
On page 26 is the SHA PAYGO capital. The recommendation was to concur. However, on page 15 of the Salmon packet is the first of several pieces of additional actions. The first one requests a report on road and bridge safety.
Move to concur.
Thank you.
Move to adopt.
On page 16 is a narrative that was similar to narrative adopted last year, requiring a report on bike lanes for Old Georgetown Road, which is Maryland 187.
Move to adopt.
Thank you.
On page 18, because that last one goes 16, 17, page 18 is a requested report on vehicle rentals that the SHA does for short-term rentals.
Move to adopt.
Thank you.
And finally, on page 19 is a report on Adopt a Road program. Again, this is an additional item.
Move to adopt.
So back in the decision document on page 27 begins the Maryland Port Administration. The first recommendation is to delete funding for a new cybersecurity position. The agency disagreed.
Just want to note on that what that means is we are not deleting the position of cybersecurity for the port. The subcommittee overruled that one position. So we are rejecting ELS's recommendation on that.
Item number 2 on that page is recommended narrative requiring quarterly reporting on the Howard Street Tunnel Program. The project, the agency concurred. Back in the salmon colored packet on page 20, there are 3 items. The first item withholds $200,000 pending a report on the rehabilitation of the North Locust Point terminal and how that will impact road salt distribution operations. On page 21 is narrative requesting an update on the Clean Ports program. This is a federal program which the port has received a couple large grants. Page 22, for port operations, requested report on recovery metrics following the partial shutdown of the port caused by the collapse of the Francis Scott Key Bridge. And then on page 23, final one for the port is quarterly reports on their federal fund receipts. Back in the decision document on page 28, this begins the Maryland, still on the port, but for their capital program, the recommendation was to concur with the governor's allowance. The agency concurred. Page 29 is the Motor Vehicle Administration. The recommendation was to concur. However, back in the salmon packet on page 24, there are 2 items for consideration. The first item on page 24 requests a report on the new insurance coverage verification system.
Move to adopt the allowance and adopt the addition.
And then on page 25 of the salmon packet, narrative requesting a report on electric vehicle adoption and its impact on the vehicle emissions inspections program. That takes us to page 30 of the, back in the decision document, which is the MVA PAYGO program. The recommendation was concur with the governor's allowance. The agency concurred.
Page 31 begins the Maryland Transit Administration. The recommendation was to adopt a bi-monthly narrative on the Purple Line project status. There was a slight modification to this on page 28 of the salmon packet. The agency concurred with the initial reporting. All right. On the salmon packet, there are a couple of other items for MTA. On page 26 of the packet, there was an additional page to delete 76 new positions for MTA police and associated funding. All right. On page 27 of the packet, there is an additional narrative on the MARC train service expansion and improvement. And on moving back to the decision document on page 32, for the MTA PAYGO budget, the recommendation was to concur and the agency concurred. Okay.
On page 33 of the decision document begins the Maryland Aviation Administration. The recommendation is to delete a new position and associated funding. The agency disagreed. On page 34 is the MAA capital program. The recommendation was concur with the governor's allowance. The agency concurred. And that concludes MDOT.
On page 35, for the Maryland Transportation Authority, the recommendation was, this is a non-budgeted agency. The agency concurred. However, there are a couple of additional pieces of narrative in the salmon packet, beginning on page 29. This is narrative requesting quarterly reporting on the Francis Scott Key Bridge reconstruction.
Move to adopt the additional narrative.
Page 30 is narrative asking for a report on the feasibility of capturing images of only rear license plates of vehicles at toll facilities.
Move to adopt the additional narrative.
And on page 31, there is an additional piece of narrative requesting reports on collecting outstanding toll debt.
Move to adopt the additional narrative.
On page 36 of the decision document for the Transportation Authority PAYGO budget, recommendation was non-budgeted. The agency concurred.
Page 37 is the Department of Natural Resources. The first recommendation there is for Chesapeake Bay Restoration Spending Summary Report. The agency concurred.
Move to adopt.
Bottom of page 37 is Historical and Projected Chesapeake Bay Restoration Spending Report. The agency is okay with the report, but asks for a little less detail.
Move to adopt.
Moving now to page 39. Recommendation 3 there is for the Chesapeake and Atlantic Coastal Bays 2010 Trust Fund Annual Work and Expenditure Plans. Agency concurred.
Move to adopt.
Moving now to the salmon packets, page 32. There's an additional page that would restrict $1 million of the State Lakes Protection and Restoration Fund for the use of a Deep Creek Lake pilot program.
Move to adopt.
On page 33, this is a DLS recommendation. This was left out of the analysis. It was recommended in the Chesapeake Bay Overview. It's for a whole Watershed Act funding report.
Move to adopt.
Moving back to the main decision document, page 41. It's the Department of Agriculture. The first recommendation there was to delete funding and 6 positions, new positions in the budget. The agency disagreed, noting that their vacancy rate has come down significantly compared to the December 31, 2024 data.
You have a modification.
Okay.
The modification on this is that the subcommittee felt that we should be keeping 4 of the 6 positions. And so our recommendation is to delete 2 positions here instead of 4. Just want to check with everyone that that is their understanding.
Move to adopt that modification.
Okay, it'd be approximately $121,000 or so in special funds. We'll clarify that. Recommendation number 2 and number 3 on pages 41 and 42 concern the Leaders in Environmentally Engaged Farming Program. So there's $900,000 in the budget. DLS's recommendation number 3, if you don't mind me jumping to that, is to reduce $400,000. That would then take the funding down to $500,000 for the program. So that was recommendation number 3 on page 42.
Move to adopt recommendation number 2.
All right, so then back on page 41, you now have $500,000 in the program. The idea would be to reduce that funding to 0 if the legislation creating the program is not passed. And if the legislation does pass, then $100,000 of the $500,000 would be restricted until the submission of a report.
Move to adopt.
All right, on page 42, at the bottom there is recommendation number 4 to delete funding for U.S. Department of Agriculture federal fund grant that was not awarded. The agency concurs, $2 million in federal funds.
Move to adopt.
Moving now to the salmon packet, page 34 is an additional DLS recommendation concerning supplemental budget number 1. DLS's overall position was that new positions to be reduced and potentially the funding also for those new positions. So in supplemental budget number 1, DLS recommended deleting 12 new positions and associated funding. They're noted here for those various programs, sexual services and animal health and so forth.
However, we are modifying this to delete 11 new positions and retain 1 new position for the rural Maryland hospital.
We can modify to delete 11 new positions, retain 1 new position.
Excellent. Moving back to the main decision document on page 43 is the Department of the Environment. First recommendation there is for annual report on the used tire cleanup and recycling fund. The agency concurred. Recommendation number 2 is for annual narrative on the enforcement inspection position strength assessment.
The Maryland Environmental Service begins on page 45. Our recommendation was to adopt a narrative requesting an annual funding statement from MES. The agency concurred. There is one other additional action for MES on page 35 of the additional page packet. This is a narrative requesting a report on establishing recycling in the town of Ocean City. Okay. And that concludes the packet.
So, with that, we will, make a motion to move that we adopt the entire document.
So moved.
All those in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Okay, we have adopted that budget, and with that, I just want to make a couple of quick comments. One, this committee, my gratitude goes out to each one of you who really worked hard in a very difficult environment this year to make the best decisions that we could for the agencies and for the people of Maryland. We appreciate the governor's budget, particularly on transportation, as he did provide additional revenues this year, which is going to enable a lot of highway projects and transit projects to move forward all over the state. And what we tried to do in our budget language was bring in some more accountability where we felt it was needed for certain agencies to make responsible cuts, but to keep critical positions even if they were new. So we were as discerning as we could be on that. We wanted to protect the environmental program open space as much as possible, and I think this whole committee agreed with that, and we achieved that. And we also want to track any potential harm that comes from federal cuts, and so you'll see budget language in here on that, and also to make sure that we stay on top of tracking the Key Bridge construction. Members, is there anything that you wanted to add about this or the process? Thank you, and I would have my members come to the dais after the meeting is over, and thank you all for joining us today. And thank you, Ken.